The call came in the middle of the night, one that would change everything. I had just fallen into an uneasy sleep after a long week of pretending that nothing was wrong, but then the phone rang. It was a name I hadn't seen in months, Maya, my best friend, my confidante. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering in my chest. We hadn't talked since the night she left for college. There had been no fallout, no dramatic goodbyes, just an unspoken distance that felt like it was made of thick, unbreakable glass. But now her name blazed in the dark. I picked up. Maya. My voice cracked before I could even get the word out. Maya, what's wrong? I asked, my breath catching in my throat. The sound that came through the receiver was not what I expected. She was sobbing. Desperation and panic in her voice made the world feel suddenly too quiet. I had never heard her like this before. She was always the one who held it together, the one who could calm any storm. I can't do it anymore, she whispered. The words, so raw and filled with anguish, felt like they cut through the air. My stomach dropped. I can't live with this. With them, it's all too much. I couldn't make sense of it. Her words were disjointed, broken, but there was a heaviness, a weight I could feel all the way through the phone. Please, I need you. I don't know who else to turn to. I wanted to ask what had happened, what she meant, but I didn't. I could tell she needed me. So I did what I always did when Maya needed me. I dropped everything. I told her I was coming, and within minutes I was on my way to the other side of town. My heart racing with worry, my mind running wild. What had happened to her? Why was she so broken? Why now, after all these years, was she suddenly reaching out, tearing down walls that neither of us had even known existed? As I drove through the empty streets, the city seemed to fade away behind me. The only thing that mattered now was Maya, my best friend, the person who had known me better than anyone else, the person who had shared all my secrets, my fears, and my dreams. And in that moment, I realized something that took me by surprise. I didn't just want to help her. I wanted to be the one she turned to. Not because I had always been there, but because I needed to be. The connection between us was undeniable, but it had always been something we never dared to address, something too fragile to touch, until now. As I pulled up to her apartment building, a strange, painful excitement swirled in my chest. What would this night bring? And what would I do when the most unexpected truth of all came crashing through the door? I found her in the corner of her apartment, curled into herself on the couch. The only light came from the glow of a dim lamp, casting long shadows across the room. Maya's face was buried in her hands, her body trembling as if the weight of the world was pressing down on her fragile frame. My heart ached at the sight. I had seen her cry before, but this was different. There was an intensity to her pain that I had never witnessed. I sat beside her, reaching out instinctively, but she pulled away slightly, as if she didn't want to burden me more than she already had. Maya, I whispered, my voice cracking. What happened? Please talk to me. She took a shaky breath, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, but she couldn't look at me. The silence between us felt thick, like 1,000 unsaid words, like there was something hanging in the air, just out of reach. Finally, she spoke, but her voice was barely audible. I'm not the person they think I am, she confessed. Her words hung in the air like a confession that had been buried for too long. I don't know how to keep pretending anymore. The room seemed to close in around me as she spoke, and I felt the weight of her words like a slap to the face. I wanted to ask what she meant, but I knew better. Maya wasn't the type to admit things unless they were truly crushing her. I took her hand in mine, squeezing it gently. You don't have to pretend with me, I said softly. "You never have to pretend with me." Her eyes finally met mine, red-rimmed and filled with unshed tears. But there was something else in them, something I couldn't place, something deeper. "It's not that simple," she replied, a quiet laugh escaping her lips, though it sounded hollow, as though she didn't even recognize the sound. She hesitated before continuing, and I could feel the weight of her decision pressing against her chest. I'm in love with someone, and it's not who anyone expects." She let out a breath, like she had just admitted something that had been eating at her for far too long. "It's you." The words hung in the air, vibrating between us until they settled like a thick fog. I froze. For a moment I thought I hadn't heard her correctly. I couldn't have. Maya, in love with me. The best friend I had known for years, the one I had shared everything with, the one who had always been my rock. But there was no denying the sincerity in her voice. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a mistake. Maya was looking at me, vulnerable and raw, like she had just stripped away all the barriers she had built around herself. The space between us felt electric now, charged with something I hadn't dared to consider. She wasn't just breaking down in front of me. She was offering me a part of her that had been hidden, even from me. And I couldn't help but wonder as the realization sank in. Was this the truth I had been too afraid to face all along? Was this the connection I had always felt, but never dared to name? The words she had just spoken echoed in my mind, and my heart skipped a beat as if it were suddenly caught in a storm. I stared at Maya, feeling the weight of her confession slowly sinking in. She loved me. The idea felt foreign, almost absurd. We had been best friends for as long as I could remember. We had shared everything, our hopes, our fears, our darkest secrets. And yet somehow I had never seen this coming. I had never even considered it. In the silence that stretched between us, the only sound I could hear was my own heartbeat, pounding in my ears, a frantic reminder that this moment was real. I couldn't tell if my brain was trying to catch up with my emotions, or if I was simply too afraid to confront the truth. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "Maya, you don't mean that. You can't." The words slipped out before I could stop them, the disbelief in my voice so clear that it almost hurt. I pulled my hand away from hers almost instinctively. It wasn't that I didn't care for her or that I didn't value everything we had shared. It was just too much, too sudden, too unexpected. I had spent years in the comfort of knowing exactly where I stood with her, no complications, no confusion. But now everything was uncertain. Maya, however, didn't flinch. She didn't retreat into herself the way I thought she would. Instead, she leaned forward, her eyes searching mine, steady and unwavering. "I know it's a lot to take in," she said, her voice low but resolute. "But I've been running from this for so long. I thought if I stayed away, if I buried it deep enough, it would go away. But it didn't. It just kept growing, and it became impossible to ignore. I'm in love with you, and it's been suffocating me for months." I wanted to respond, to tell her that this wasn't what I wanted, that we were too important to each other to risk it, to destroy what we had. But before I could speak, something unexpected happened, something that completely shattered the fragile wall I had been trying to hold up. Maya's eyes filled with tears again, and she choked back a sob, her hand gripping my arm with a desperation I had never seen before. "Please," she whispered, "don't hate me. I didn't choose this. It just happened." The desperation in her voice was like a dagger to my chest, and in that moment something shifted within me. I had never seen her like this, so vulnerable, so exposed. It was a side of Maya I had never allowed myself to fully witness, and suddenly, I understood just how much courage it had taken for her to admit her feelings. She wasn't just confessing her love. She was laying bare her soul, risking everything, her friendship with me, her sense of self, just to be honest. And yet I couldn't help but feel conflicted. Was I really willing to risk everything too? To acknowledge that there had been moments, fleeting and hidden deep in my heart, where I had wondered if maybe, just maybe, I had felt the same way. I looked at Maya, really looked at her, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I could ever see her the same way again. And that thought terrified me. Would I lose her completely if I didn't feel the same way? Or worse, would I lose myself in the process? The silence that followed was thick with all the questions neither of us were brave enough to ask. But I knew the answer was already hanging in the air between us, waiting to be acknowledged. But the twist came when Maya, sensing my hesitation, stood up suddenly. Her eyes were no longer pleading but determined, as if she had made a decision that I hadn't fully grasped yet. I can't keep pretending anymore. This is me. This is who I am. Take it or leave it. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a confession of love. This was a declaration of who we were meant to be. It was everything all at once, and I didn't know if I was ready to accept it. But I couldn't walk away either. Not from her. Not from us. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind was a whirlwind, spinning between fear, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite place. Something stirring deep in my chest. Maya stood there, waiting for my answer, her posture a mix of vulnerability and strength. She wasn't begging me, and that made everything even harder. She had already laid it all on the table. She had given me her truth. Now it was my turn. But how could I even begin to process what had just happened? The woman I had known for years, the one I had always considered my closest friend, had just cracked open the door to something uncharted, something dangerous, something beautiful, something terrifying. I stood up slowly, not sure what to do with the churning mess inside me. Part of me wanted to run, to escape the overwhelming feeling that seemed to be suffocating me. But another part, an even stronger part, wanted to reach out, to take her hand again, to tell her that I didn't know what this was, but I wasn't ready to walk away from her. I looked at her, seeing her so exposed, so raw, and I realized that I wasn't the only one who had been carrying this weight. Maya had been living with the secret of her feelings for so long, and the fact that she was standing in front of me now, ready to face whatever came next, took every ounce of bravery she had left. That bravery lit a fire within me, one that I couldn't ignore anymore. Maya, I said her name softly, the first time I had said it since her confession, and when I did, I felt the tension ease, if only for a moment. I don't know what to say. The honesty in my voice surprised me. There was no pretense here, no safe walls to hide behind. The world felt as if it were both opening and collapsing at the same time. I never thought about us like this. I don't know if I'm ready for what this could mean, for what this could change. The words spilled out before I could stop them. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was simply trying to make sense of everything. But as soon as I spoke them, I felt something shift. It wasn't an answer, not yet, but it was the beginning of a truth I had been avoiding for far too long. Maya's eyes softened, the harshness in them melting away as she stepped closer to me. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," she said quietly, her voice full of understanding. "I didn't expect you to, but I couldn't keep hiding anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. I needed you to know how I feel. No matter what happens next, I needed you to hear me." Her words were so sincere, And in that moment, I realized that I had been holding myself back for years, afraid of the very thing I now knew was inevitable. The room was thick with emotion, but it wasn't just her pain or her fear that filled the space. It was mine too, but it was different now. It wasn't just fear. It was also curiosity, a deep yearning to understand everything we had been to each other and everything we could become. What had I been afraid of all this time? The risk of losing her, or the fear of finally admitting that my feelings for her were more than just platonic? I thought back to all the quiet moments, the times when she would lean into me just a little longer than necessary, the way our fingers would brush when we sat next to each other, the way her laugh had always been the most beautiful sound in the world to me. Had I been blind to it all? Or had I been too scared to admit what was staring me right in the face? In that moment, I saw everything clearly. Not just Maya's love for me, but my own feelings that had been buried under layers of fear and hesitation. The truth was undeniable now. I loved her too. And the realization hit me like a tidal wave, drowning out all the doubts and fears I had been holding on to for years. The only thing left to do now was decide what to do with it. And as Maya stood before me, vulnerable and waiting, I realized there was only one answer that made sense. "Maya," I said again, but this time it wasn't full of uncertainty. This time it was full of something else, something real. "I'm not ready to walk away from this. From you, I never was." I saw a flicker of relief in her eyes, the tension in her body finally melting away. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just a confession. It was the beginning of something neither of us had ever imagined. And no matter where it took us, we were about to discover just how deep our connection truly went. The weight of my words hung in the air, but this time it was different. It wasn't the heavy uncertainty that had clouded my mind for so long. It was a promise, an unspoken vow. Maya's face softened, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and disbelief, as if she had been holding her breath for so long that she wasn't sure what to do now that she could finally exhale. She took a small, tentative step toward me, her hands trembling slightly as if afraid that if she moved too quickly, this fragile moment might shatter. But when her hand reached out for mine, it felt like everything inside me finally clicked into place. It wasn't just the physical contact. It was the sense of belonging, of understanding, of knowing that the person I had been walking through life with had been right beside me this entire time, even when I couldn't fully see it. I squeezed her hand gently, the connection between us grounding me in a way I never expected. "I'm scared," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "But I'm not scared of you. I'm scared of how much this means, of how much I've been denying what we are, what we could be." Maya's eyes softened even more, and for the first time I saw the fear in her eyes too, the vulnerability that she had never shown before. This wasn't just about love, it was about trust, about putting ourselves out there in a way neither of us had ever dared to. We had spent so many years as best friends, so many years living in the safety of what we knew, but now the safety net was gone. There were no more barriers between us. It was just raw, unfiltered honesty. And for the first time, I wasn't sure where the line between friendship and love even existed anymore. "Me too," she whispered, and I could see the tears in her eyes once more, but this time they were different. They were not tears of pain, but of release, of finally letting go of a weight that had held her captive for far too long. But maybe that's the point. We've been so afraid of what this could mean for so long, but what if we don't let fear control us anymore? Her words hit me like a shock wave. What if we didn't let fear control us anymore? The thought was liberating, terrifying, and beautiful all at once. What if we could have everything, everything we had always dreamed of but never allowed ourselves to imagine? What if this was the moment we could stop running, stop hiding, and start living the truth we had always known deep down? And in that moment, something inside me clicked. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what the future held for us, or if we could navigate this new path without stumbling, without falling apart. But I knew one thing for certain. This connection between us was too strong to ignore. It wasn't just the result of time spent together or the closeness of a friendship. It was something deeper, something neither of us could change, no matter how hard we tried. We had always been meant to be more than just best friends. I had felt it for so long, and now Maya had finally given me the courage to admit it too. I pulled her close, wrapping my arms around her, feeling her warmth and her heartbeat beneath my hands. The world outside seemed distant, as if time had paused, allowing us this one perfect moment to just be. "Let's not let this moment slip away," I whispered into her ear. "Whatever happens, let's take this step together. Let's figure it out, even if it's messy, even if we don't have all the answers." Maya nodded against my chest, her arms tightening around me as if she too was afraid that if she let go, the reality of what we had just admitted might disappear. But I knew something now that I hadn't known before. It didn't matter how messy or uncertain things were. We had already taken the hardest step. We had crossed that invisible line from best friends to something far more powerful, and there was no going back. We were no longer just two people who shared memories and stories. We were something new, something real. And as the night stretched on, I realized that the most unexpected journey had already begun. And it wasn't just the journey of love. It was the journey of finally allowing ourselves to be true to who we really were together.